When it comes to learning, we often think of it as one single process. But in behavior analysis, we actually see two very distinct paths that our behavior follows. Today, we're going to break down the difference between learning from direct hands-on experience versus learning by simply following the rules.
To get us started, let's think about a really simple everyday scenario. Imagine it's your first time ever baking a cake. How would you do it? Really, there are two main ways you could tackle this. So option one is probably what most of us would do. You'd find a recipe and follow it to the letter, right? 2 cups of this, 1 cup of that, pop it in the oven at 350 for exactly 30 minutes. You are relying completely on that set of instructions.
But then there's option 2. This is the more experimental approach. You could just start mixing ingredients based on what you think should go in a cake, bake it, and see what happens. The first one might be a disaster, but you learn from it and you adjust for the next try. It's all about trial and error.
Now, these two ways of baking a cake, they're a perfect illustration of the two major types of learning we're going to explore. One is guided by instructions, and the other is shaped entirely by the consequences of your actions.
All right, let's start with that trial and error method. In the world of behavior analysis, we have a name for this: contingency-shaped behavior. It's basically a fancy way of saying learning by doing. The formal definition is operant behavior acquired and maintained through direct experience with consequences. Now, the key phrase there, the one you really need to remember, is direct experience. It means your actions produce an outcome, and that outcome is what directly influences what you do next time. So what does this look like in practice? Well, it means the behavior is controlled by what happens right after you do something. For it to be effective, those consequences have to be pretty much immediate. It's usually a gradual learning process. But the cool thing is, it's incredibly adaptive to any changes in the environment. The classic example that everyone knows is touching a hot stove. The action, touching the stove, is followed instantly by a very painful consequence, getting burned. That direct, immediate feedback shapes your future behavior so fast, you learn very, very quickly not to do that again. Let's think about another one. Imagine you're walking along, not paying attention, and you slip in a big puddle. It's embarrassing, you get wet. The next day, you see another puddle on the sidewalk, and this time, you carefully walk all the way around it. Is this contingency-shaped behavior? Absolutely. Your choice to avoid the puddle was directly shaped by the unpleasant consequence of slipping before. You didn't need a sign or someone telling you what to do. The environment itself taught you the lesson.
Okay, now let's circle back to that other way of baking the cake, following the recipe. This is our gateway into rule-governed behavior. This is all about learning from instructions and language instead of just direct experience.
So the technical definition here is operant behavior under the control of verbal antecedents. If verbal antecedent is really just a rule, an instruction, or even a piece of advice that you get before you act, the rule itself describes the contingency. It lays out the if you do this, then that will happen scenario for you.
The big thing here is that the behavior is controlled by language. That means you don't actually need to experience the consequences yourself. Because of that, the consequences can be delayed, sometimes way in the future, or you might avoid them altogether. And this makes learning incredibly fast and efficient. You can just be told what to do instead of having to figure everything out the hard way.
A perfect real-world example is seeing a no diving sign at a shallow pool. You follow that rule, right? But it's not because you've ever had the painful experience of diving and hitting the bottom. You follow it because the verbal rule, the sign, is enough to control your behavior. Okay, so we've got a handle on both types of learning. Now let's put them right next to each other to really highlight what makes them so different.
First, let's talk about the source of control. For contingency-shaped behavior, the control comes from immediate, nonverbal feedback, right from the environment itself. For rule-governed behavior, it's all about the verbal rule. Next up, immediacy of consequences. This is a big one. Contingency shaping absolutely requires immediate feedback. With rules, the consequences can be delayed for a long, long time. And finally, that affects what we call sensitivity. Contingency-shaped behavior is super sensitive. It adapts to changes really quickly. Rule-governed behavior can be a lot more rigid. A person might just keep following a rule even if the situation has changed and the rule doesn't quite apply anymore.
Now, it's really important to get this. These two types of learning aren't enemies. They're not mutually exclusive. In fact, in applied settings, they're at their most powerful when you use them together. A really common and effective strategy,
especially in therapy or teaching, is to kick things off with a clear rule. This helps establish the behavior you want to see very quickly. But the long-term goal is to have that behavior eventually be maintained by its natural, direct consequences.
You can see this play out perfectly in a therapeutic setting. Step 1, the therapist provides a rule. If you complete this puzzle, then you get to take a break. That's the verbal antecedent. Step 2, the child does the behavior. They complete the puzzle. And step 3, the consequence. The child immediately gets their break, which is a direct, positive reinforcement. After a while, the act of completing the task just becomes associated with that good feeling, and you might not even need the verbal rule anymore.
So as we wrap up, let's distill this down to the most important takeaway, which is really all about how to apply these ideas in the real world.
When should you use which? Well, rules are your best friend when it comes to safety, efficiency, or teaching really complex tasks where trial and error would just be too slow or even dangerous. On the flip side, direct experience, that contingency shaping, is what you want for developing skills that need to be flexible, adaptive, and become second nature.
So really, the critical skill for any teacher, any parent, any practitioner isn't just knowing the definitions, it's developing the wisdom to know when it's time to provide a clear rule and when it's best to step back and let experience be the teacher. Getting that balance right is truly the key to effective teaching and behavior change.